Think medieval folks were all about being pure and celibate. Think they spent their days praying and staying away from anything even slightly sexual. Well, hold on to your hats because you're about to learn that medieval sexuality was so crazy, so weird, and so completely off the rails that it makes modern hookup culture look like a church service. Let me know in the comments where you're watching this video from. And don't forget to like and subscribe. You're about to explore the insane world of medieval sexual customs that make 50 Shades look like a kid's fairy tale. From love potions made with animal private parts to public trials where guys had to prove they couldn't perform in front of judges, these are the stories that will totally flip everything you thought you knew about the Middle Ages. Spoiler alert. They weren't called the Dark Ages because people weren't getting busy. They were dark because of the crazy stuff people were doing while getting busy. The bundling bedlets kick things off with one of the most ridiculous dating customs in all of human history. Bundling. Picture this scene. You're a young medieval guy and your folks have picked out a potential wife for you. Awesome. Time for a romantic date night, right? Think again. Time to get wrapped up in a bag and tossed into bed with someone you barely know. Bundling was basically medieval supervised sleepovers, except way more awkward and with way higher stakes. Young couples would get wrapped up together in bed, fully clothed, often with a wooden plank shoved between them to stop any funny business. Because nothing screams romance like sleeping next to someone with a chunk of wood keeping your bodies apart. But here's where things get absolutely mental. This wasn't just something parents put up with. They actually encouraged it. Families would literally invite potential suitors to spend the night all bundled up with their daughters, thinking this was somehow a safe way to let young people get acquainted. It's like medieval parents looked at chaperoned dating and thought, you know what this needs? More physical restraints and shared body warmth. The whole thing was so popular that they actually made special bundling sacks just for this purpose. We're talking about an entire medieval industry built around stopping people from touching each other while forcing them to share a bed. The mental gymnastics here are just mind-blowing. And guess what? Bundling didn't exactly work like it was supposed to. Historical records show that pregnancy rates among bundling couples were way higher than couples who dated more normally. Turns out that sticking to hormonal young people in bed together, even with barriers, doesn't actually stop nature from doing its thing. Who would have thought? The best part, religious leaders back then were constantly whining about bundling, calling it sinful and dangerous, while being completely unable to shut it down because it was so deeply rooted in country culture. It's like the medieval version of parents trying to ban TikTok. Technically doable, but practically impossible. Aphrodisiac feasts. Medieval people took the saying, "Food is love," to absolutely horrifying levels. We're not talking about chocolate and wine here. We're talking about fancy banquets designed specifically to get people turned on, featuring ingredients that would make a modern health inspector shut you down immediately. The crown jewel of medieval love food. Animal testicles, specifically the testicles of young bulls, rams, and boars, which were considered the ultimate bedroom enhancement food. Medieval recipe books are packed with instructions for stones. That's what they called testicles because, apparently, medieval people were too proper to say balls. They prepared them every way you can imagine. Roasted, boiled, fried, ground into powder, mixed into wine. If there was a way to cook testicles, medieval chefs discovered it, but testicles were just the start. Medieval aphrodisiac menus included sparrow brains because apparently eating tiny bird brains was supposed to boost your sexual game. They served dishes made from the reproductive organs of all kinds of animals, believing that consuming fertility would create fertility. It's like sympathetic magic, but with way more organ meat. The spice trade wasn't just about making food taste better. It was about getting lucky. Pepper, ginger, cinnamon, and saffron were all considered powerful love potions, which explains why these spices cost more than gold. Medieval people were paying fortunes for what was basically edible performance enhancers. Rich nobles would throw elaborate love banquets where every single dish was designed to boost sexual desire and stamina. Here's the really crazy part. These aphrodisiac feasts were often served at wedding receptions. Imagine going to a wedding today and getting served a 7-course meal of animal genitals and brain matter, all designed to help the newlyweds perform better later that night. The wedding cake was often made with ingredients like pine nuts, almonds, and honey. Not because they tasted amazing together, but because they were all considered sexually stimulating. Medieval doctors actually wrote detailed guides on aphrodisiac cooking, complete with specific recipes and prep instructions. We have surviving books that read like medieval sex cookbooks with titles like On the Generation of Semen and Foods That Increase Lust. These weren't underground publications. They were legit medical texts studied by scholars and doctors. The obsession with aphrodisiac food got so intense that certain ingredients were actually banned during religious fasting periods, not because they were unhealthy, but because they were considered too sexually stimulating for people who were supposed to be focusing on spiritual stuff. The consummation circus. If you think having your parents meet your boyfriend is awkward, try having a room full of nobles watch you lose your virginity. Welcome to the medieval wedding ceremony, where privacy wasn't just discouraged. It was illegal for aristocratic marriages. The reasoning behind witnessed consummation was actually pretty logical. In a completely insane medieval way, marriage wasn't considered legally valid until it was consummated, and since marriage contracts often involved huge transfers of land, money, and political power, there needed to be witnesses to prove the deed was done, because nothing says legally binding contract like having your wedding guests watch you have sex. The whole process was elaborate and humiliating in equal parts. After the wedding ceremony, the bride and groom would be walked to their bedroom by a parade of wedding guests. The bride would be undressed by female relatives while the groom was undressed by male relatives, because apparently medieval people believed in gender-separated strip shows. Then came the main event. The couple would be put in bed together, while witnesses, usually high-ranking nobles, church officials, and family members, would stand around the bed and watch. We're not talking about a quick peek to confirm things were happening. These witnesses would stay for the entire time, sometimes offering encouragement and tips during the process. But wait, it gets even worse. In some cases, witnesses would actually examine the bed sheets afterward, looking for blood as proof of the bride's virginity and evidence that penetration had happened. Imagine having to present your bed sheets to a panel of judges like you're submitting evidence in a court case, which technically you were. The most insane part: this wasn't just for royal marriages. Any marriage involving significant property or political alliances could require witnessed consummation. We're talking about thousands of medieval couples who had to perform their most intimate moment in front of an audience of relatives and strangers. Some couples tried to beat the system by having witnesses wait outside the bedroom door, but even this wasn't always good enough. Court records show cases where marriages were annulled because the consummation wasn't properly witnessed, meaning the couple had to do it all over again, this time with proper supervision. The practice was so normal that medieval etiquette guides actually included instructions for proper wedding ceremony behavior, both for the couple and for the witnesses. There were rules about where to stand, what to say, and how long to watch. Medieval people turned voyeurism into a formal social institution. Sacred breeding schedules. Medieval aristocrats didn't just have sex, they scheduled it like a corporate board meeting, complete with astrological consultants and religious advisors. We're talking about a time when getting pregnant required more planning than a NASA space mission. The medieval obsession with timing conception was based on a mix of astrology, medicine, and religious doctrine that created the most complicated baby-making schedule in human history. Couples would check astrological charts to determine the most favorable planetary alignments for conception, because apparently medieval people believed the stars cared about their sex lives. According to medieval medical texts, the best time to conceive was during the waxing moon, when the woman was in a state of hot humoral balance, and when specific planets were in favorable positions. Some texts recommended waiting for particular saints' feast days, believing that children conceived on holy days would be blessed with special qualities. Imagine having to check 3 different calendars just to figure out when you're allowed to try for a baby. But the timing obsession went way beyond just picking the right day. Medieval doctors provided detailed instructions about the optimal time of day, usually midnight, the ideal weather conditions, warm and humid, and even the proper direction the bed should face east toward the rising sun. Having sex became a logistical nightmare, requiring more preparation than a medieval siege. The gender selection methods were absolutely nuts. To conceive a boy, couples were told to have sex during the waxing moon, while the man tied off his left testicle. Yes, you read that right, because medieval people believed boys came from the right testicle and girls from the left. The level of anatomical ignorance required to believe this is truly mind-boggling. Religious considerations made everything even more complicated. The church banned sex on Sundays, Wednesdays, Fridays, during Lent, during Advent, during menstruation, during pregnancy, while breastfeeding, and on approximately 183 other days throughout the year. Medieval couples had to navigate a minefield of religious restrictions just to find a day when sex wasn't considered sinful. Wealthy families would actually hire specialists, a combination of doctor, astrologer, and priest, to create personalized conception schedules. These fertility consultants would analyze the couple's birth charts, medical histories, and religious obligations to determine the optimal times for baby making. It's like medieval people invented fertility apps, except with more superstition and way less scientific accuracy. The pressure to produce heirs according to these elaborate schedules was so intense that some couples would travel hundreds of miles to be in the right location during their optimal conception window, because apparently geography also affected baby-making success. The girdle of Venus. Medieval people turned underwear into religious artifacts, and the results were exactly as weird as you'd expect. We're talking about a time when your choice of undergarments could determine whether you'd have children, and when getting dressed required consulting both a priest and a doctor. The girdle of Venus wasn't just a poetic name, it was an actual belt worn around the waist or hips, often made of silk or linen, and covered with religious prayers, astrological symbols, or magical spells. These belts were believed to boost fertility, ensure safe childbirth, and improve sexual performance, but fertility belts were just the beginning of medieval sexual accessories. Women would wear special amulets containing everything from powdered unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, to ground-up gemstones, all designed to enhance their reproductive capabilities. Some amulets contained written prayers or Bible verses, because apparently God needed written reminders about what you wanted him to help you with. The most bizarre fertility accessory was the conception stone, a small rock or crystal that women would stick into their undergarments during sex, believing it would help them conceive. Different stones were thought to produce different results: emeralds for boys, sapphires for girls, and diamonds for twins. Medieval people thought they could control genetics with jewelry. Men weren't left out of the magical underwear game. They had their own fertility accessories, including special rings worn on specific fingers, amulets containing animal parts, usually testicles, because medieval people were obsessed with testicles, and even specially blessed loincloths that were supposed to enhance sexual performance. The church got involved in the underwear blessing business. Priests would bless fertility belts, conception amulets, and even bed sheets, charging fees for their services. It's like medieval people turned their sex lives into a religious subscription service. Some fertility accessories were so complicated they required instruction manuals. We have surviving texts that explain exactly how to wear certain belts, which prayers to recite while putting them on, and what to do if they stopped working. Medieval people created customer service for magical underwear. The most expensive fertility accessories were made from materials like silk imported from China, gold, thread, and gemstones, making them luxury items that only the wealthy could afford. Poor people had to make do with homemade versions using local materials, creating a class system based on the quality of your magical underwear. The belief in fertility accessories was so strong that some women refused to have sex without wearing them, and some men would refuse to sleep with women who weren't properly accessorized. Medieval people turned getting dressed into a prerequisite for getting laid. Public impotence trials think modern divorce proceedings are humiliating. Try having to prove your sexual dysfunction in front of a panel of judges, medical experts, and random courtroom observers. Welcome to medieval impotence trials, where privacy went to die and dignity was legally inadmissible. Medieval impotence trials were the nuclear option of divorce proceedings. Since the church had made divorce nearly impossible, claiming your husband was impotent was one of the few ways a woman could legally escape a marriage. But proving impotence required more than just your word. It required a full-scale legal investigation into your sex life. The trial process was absolutely bonkers. First, the couple would be examined separately by medical experts who would inspect their genitals for signs of physical abnormality. Then, they'd be questioned under oath about their sexual history, frequency of attempts, and specific details about what did or didn't happen in bed. But the real nightmare was the trial by Congress. Yes, that's what they actually called it. If the medical examination was inconclusive, the court could order the couple to attempt sexual intercourse under supervision. The supervised sex sessions took place in special rooms, either in the courthouse or in rented chambers, with medical experts and court officials watching through peepholes or from behind screens. The couple was given a specific amount of time to perform, and if the man couldn't achieve or maintain an erection, the marriage could be annulled. Some men tried to cheat the system by using various enhancement methods. Medieval Viagra made from herbs, animal parts, or magical potions. Court records show cases where men were caught trying to smuggle aphrodisiacs into the trial chamber, leading to even more humiliating examinations to ensure they weren't using artificial assistants. The most insane part, these trials could drag on for months or even years, with multiple supervised attempts required before a verdict was reached. Some couples had to perform for the court dozens of times, because apparently medieval judges believed in giving people plenty of chances to prove their sexual competence. Women who brought impotence charges faced their own humiliations. They had to prove they were sexually willing and capable, which often involved intimate examinations and detailed questioning about their own sexual responses. The assumption was that if a man couldn't perform, it might be the woman's fault for not being attractive or enthusiastic enough. The social consequences of impotence trials were devastating. Win or lose, everyone involved became the subject of public gossip and ridicule. Some men preferred to accept annulment rather than undergo the trial, essentially admitting to impotence to avoid the humiliation of public testing. Brothel. Business empire. Here's a fact that will blow your mind. The medieval church wasn't just tolerating prostitution, they were running the biggest sex trafficking operation in Europe. We're talking about an institution that preached about sexual purity while secretly profiting from the world's oldest profession. In 12th century London, the borough of Southwark had 18 licensed brothels employing over 1,000 prostitutes, and who owned these brothels The Bishop of Winchester thought the church's involvement in prostitution wasn't a secret side business. Church leaders argued that prostitution was a necessary evil that prevented worse sins like rape, adultery, and homosexuality, so they decided to regulate and profit from it, just like today's governments. The business model was genius in its hypocrisy. The church couldn't officially condone prostitution, but there was nothing in canon law preventing them from collecting rent from brothel owners. Medieval brothels operated under strict church regulations. Prostitutes had to follow dress codes, work specific hours, and live in designated areas. They were forbidden from working on religious holidays, couldn't refuse customers without cause, and had to submit to regular medical examinations. The financial arrangements were elaborate and exploitative. Prostitutes paid rent to brothel keepers, who paid rent to property owners, who paid taxes to the church. It was a pyramid scheme with sex workers at the bottom and bishops at the top. The most insane part, the church used profits from prostitution to fund religious activities. Money earned from sex work was used to build churches, support monasteries, and pay for religious festivals. Medieval people were funding their salvation with sin money. The system was so entrenched that when reformers tried to shut down church-owned brothels, they faced massive resistance from both religious and secular authorities. Too many people were making too much money from the arrangement to let moral concerns get in the way of profit. The church's prostitution empire lasted for centuries, only ending when Protestant reformers and changing social attitudes finally made the hypocrisy too obvious to ignore. But for hundreds of years, the institution that claimed to represent God's will on earth was running a sex trafficking operation that would make modern organized crime jealous. Medieval contraception, madness. Medieval birth control methods were so bizarre, so dangerous, and so completely ineffective that they make modern contraception look like a miracle of science. Let's start with the classics, animal testicles, because apparently medieval people thought the solution to every sexual problem involved animal genitals. Women would wear pouches containing weasel testicles around their necks, believing this would prevent conception. The logic was that since weasels were considered sexually promiscuous but had small litters, their reproductive organs would transfer this controlled fertility to humans. But testicle jewelry was just the beginning. Medieval contraception included drinking potions made from everything imaginable: ground-up beaver testicles mixed with wine, powdered iron dissolved in water, and concoctions containing mercury. Yes, the poisonous metal. These days, we'd call this attempted suicide by birth control. Some women actually poisoned themselves, trying to avoid pregnancy, which technically worked because dead people can't get pregnant. The sneezing method was particularly ridiculous. Medieval doctors believed that if a woman sneezed immediately after sex, the force would expel the man's seed before conception could occur. So women would carry pepper or other irritants to induce sneezing right after intercourse. Physical barriers were equally insane. Women would insert everything from honey-soaked wool to crocodile dung into their vaginas before sex, believing these substances would block or kill sperm. Some used half a lemon as a cervical cap, which actually wasn't completely ineffective due to the citric acid, but was probably incredibly uncomfortable and definitely not recommended by any medical authority. The timing method was based on completely wrong information about female fertility. Medieval doctors believed women were most fertile during menstruation and least fertile mid-cycle, the exact opposite of reality. So couples trying to avoid pregnancy would have sex at exactly the wrong times, essentially guaranteeing conception. While thinking they were preventing it, magical contraception was a whole category of its own. Women would wear amulets containing written spells, carry special stones, or perform elaborate rituals involving everything from burning specific herbs to burying objects under full moons. Some contraceptive spells required the woman to walk backwards around a church 3 times while reciting prayers, because apparently God needed very specific instructions about birth control. The withdrawal method existed, but medieval doctors warned that it could cause serious health problems for men, including madness, blindness, and death. So even the one method that actually worked was discouraged by medical authorities who thought incomplete ejaculation would poison the male body. The medieval sexual paradox. Medieval people were sexually insane. They created a society where young couples slept together with wooden boards between them, and the church ran prostitution empires while preaching about purity. The medieval approach to sex reveals something fundamental about human nature. When people are desperate enough, they'll believe anything and try everything. Whether it's wearing magical underwear, eating animal brains for sexual enhancement, or having courts supervise sex to prove legal points.